Pak Israr, boleh start?
Ladies and gentlemen, you may access the simultaneous interpretation feature by clicking on the globe icon on the bottom right of your screen. Or if you're using a cell phone, click on the three dots on the bottom right hand, then click on Language Interpretation. Choose English if you would like to hear the interpretation in English. Choose Indonesian if you would like to hear the interpretation in Indonesian. However, please do not click Mute Original Audio to ensure that you can continue to follow the floor discussion when there is a switch in floor language. For the speakers, please choose the same channel as the language you're using. For example, choose English to speak in English and Indonesian to speak in Indonesian to avoid a collision of voice with the interpreters. Thank you. Para hadirin yang terhormat, untuk menggunakan fitur penjuru bahasan secara simultan, silakan tekan tombol bola dunia di bagian kanan bawah. Atau jika menggunakan telepon genggam, silakan tekan 3 titik pada bagian kanan bawah, kemudian Language Interpretation. Silakan pilih channel yang Anda butuhkan, klik English untuk mendengarkan terjemahan dalam bahasa Inggris, atau Indonesian untuk mendengarkan terjemahan dalam bahasa Indonesia. Mohon jangan menekan tombol Mute Original Audio agar bisa tetap mendengarkan acara walaupun terjadi perubahan bahasa. Bagi para pembicara, silakan pilih channel sesuai dengan bahasa yang ingin Anda gunakan. Misalnya, pilih English untuk berbicara dalam bahasa Inggris, dan pilih Indonesian untuk berbicara dalam bahasa Indonesia, untuk menghindari percampuran suara dengan interpreter. Terima kasih.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you all had a group lunch and are ready for this mini panel on inclusion for climate. My name is Joost Nuiten from the Dutch Embassy, and I will be one of your moderators for this short panel. But before we do that, first we have a short opening remarks from our ambassador, after which Karen, my co-moderator, will dive right into our panel discussion. So first we go to the opening messages of our ambassador, Lambert Gijns.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to welcome you to the 10th session of this year's EU Climate Diplomacy Week. As a Netherlands embassy, we made a conscious choice to host a session on this 4th day, which is especially dedicated to taking everyone on board in the climate debate. Indonesia is a country where the effects of climate change and the need for climate adaptation are visible on a daily basis. Especially more vulnerable groups in society are the first to suffer the consequences of this. This makes it crucial that their voices are heard. They need to be part of that conversation. After all, it's often their ways of living that are at stake the most, varying from adapting the way they grow crops to the future of fishermen's communities in vulnerable coastal areas. Like only 2 weeks ago, I was in Central Java around Semarang, where the challenging situation of some coastal communities became painfully clear, as over the years their houses are gradually being swallowed by the water, floor by floor. Another issue is palm oil, where I think it's clear that everyone agrees that we need to stop deforestation to curb the emissions of CO2. But at the same time, we see that here in Indonesia, millions of smallholders depend on palm oil for their livelihoods. But they have to be supported in growing their crops in a more sustainable way, preferably within the existing plantations. Civil society organizations play a crucial role in voicing the experiences, the concerns, and the interests of these vulnerable groups and of other parts of society that are being heard less than they should: women, youth. As a former director within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, a director dealing with the relations with civil society, I saw the tremendous value of their support to vulnerable groups, to voice their opinions in global debates. And through their experiences in engaging with local communities, with governments, with companies, they're also important in connecting all those perspectives at international, the national, and the local levels. And ultimately, this is crucial to arrive at climate solutions that work for everyone. And that's why at our embassy, Dutch embassy, we also try to do our part in strengthening civil society. For example, working with groups of CSOs in our Global Dutch Power of Voices program, building their capacity to advocate for the interests of, for example, women, youth, smallholders in climate discussions. And we also just launched three new projects funded from our Dutch Civic Space Fund, all with the aim to amplify the voices of CSOs. Now, one of these projects is specifically focused on inclusiveness for climate resilience actions. And today's mini panel aims to underline the importance of inclusion of vulnerable groups in climate action and the essential role which civil society organizations play in this. That's why I'm very grateful that representatives of 3 of our civil society partners are willing to share their perspectives here today. And these Indonesian perspectives are even more relevant now Indonesia takes the global stage with its G20 presidency starting in December, followed by its ASEAN presidency next year or the year after in 2023. So with that, Indonesia will be at the forefront of global climate action over the coming years. Ladies and gentlemen, I will stop here as this session is short and I'm very sure our panelists will have lots to say. So once again, many thanks to them, to you who are listening to this, for sharing insights by the panelists, and to you to listening and to making this session a success. Also thanks to the EU delegation for organizing, of course, our annual EU Climate Diplomacy Week. Wish you all a very interesting session. Hope to see you soon in real life. Thank you.
Thank you, Lambert. And I think we go straight to Karen now to kick off our panel discussion.
Yes, thank you, Joost. Welcome, everyone. My name is Karen Hordijk. I'm a colleague of Joost at the Dutch Embassy here in Jakarta. And together we will moderate today's session. Well, we just listened to our ambassador, Lambert Grijns, and I can only agree with his words. We are very happy to have here today with us 3 of our civil society partners, and our 3 panelists. They will share with us today their experiences and their recommendations when it comes to inclusion for climate. So as we would like to keep this session short and crisp, I would like to invite the 3 panelists to introduce themselves, tell us the organization that they represent, and also share with us their mission for inclusion for climate. Ibu Laura, may I start with you?
Thank you, Karen, for the time and the opportunity. Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. And I am Laura from Oxfam in Indonesia. And actually, I'm very, very glad to be invited and to have the opportunity to participate in the most pressing issue for this, that it is important for all of us to fight for climate justice. For Oxfam, we have the commitment to support and also to contribute for the reduced global heating by 1.5 degrees Celsius. And in this area, it means that Oxfam work together to make sure that countries and companies are responsible for the global output so that we can make the most significant contribution. And at the same time, we represent women and also the vulnerable group so that we also hear their voice. It is important to build the resilience and shape the solutions using the gender lens, using social inclusion so that it is reflected in the design, implementation, and evaluation of the strategies that intended to be designed to address the problem in the climate. And lastly, I think it is also the voice of many of the network that fight for the climate justice, that climate finance need to be adequate, predictable, and also accessible. It means that it will support the preparedness, adaptation, mitigation, and compensation for the loss and the damage, particularly for those who are poor and vulnerable communities, ensuring the gender equality. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Ibu Laura. That sounds very interesting, and I know for sure that we will hear more from these recommendations. But first, may I ask Pajiti to also introduce himself?
Thank you, Karen. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Jusuf Tatarigan, but you can call me JT. Currently, I am an executive director of NTFP Indonesia, but I'm here as representing of Green Livelihood Alliance. Alliance consists of NTFP Indonesia, Walhi, Warsi, Tropenbos Indonesia, Sawit Watch, and Aksi Solidaritas Perempuan Yakum Energy as technical partner. The Green Livelihood Alliance is funded by Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Kingdom of Netherlands. We are working in 4 landscapes in Indonesia. Regarding to the question, our mission about the inclusion for climate, the GLA or the Green Livelihood Alliance mission regarding to climate inclusion is to ensure that tropical forests and forest landscapes in Indonesia are sustainably and inclusively governed to mitigate and adapt to climate change, fulfill human rights, and safeguard of local livelihoods. I think that's all, Karen, for the introduction. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you, GT. I think that mission totally fits with our discussion topic of today. So we are also looking forward to hear more about that. And then our third panelist, Pataki. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, Karen. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Motaki Udin. You can call me Taki. Currently, I'm working as the Executive Director, Concept US Nusa Tenggara, but at this time, I will speak behalf of the GSO Consortium on Resilience of the 9 GSO in Indonesia. We will working on inclusion for climate for the most vulnerable group like the women, youth, people from the West Sumatra, Lampung, West Nusa Tenggara, and East Nusa Tenggara. That's all, Karen.
Maybe, Pataki, because the line wasn't completely clear for the last 2 sentences, maybe you can repeat that. Are you still there, Pataki? Or otherwise, I think we can move now to the next question and
Hello.
then later on.
Okay. Hello, Karen. Can you hear you?
Yes, I can hear you clearly now. Maaf, Pataki, the last 2 sentences, we couldn't hear it properly. So maybe you can repeat it.
Okay. In our consortium, we will focus. We will working on the focus on the most vulnerable group from the climate change impact or climate change consequence, like the women, youth, people, and the person with disability. It's my last statement, Karen.
Yeah, we could hear it properly now. Thanks a lot, Pataki. Joost.
Yes, wonderful. And good to have a first impression of the focus of the 3 panelists. And I see that like we ourselves sometimes they have some technical difficulties, but I'm sure we'll get through those today. Just because we had a first impression now, but maybe to go back to the central premise of this discussion. So why is inclusion so important in climate discussion? So why should we actually put so much emphasis on the inclusiveness of those discussions? Maybe I can start asking that question to JT. What is your opinion on that? Why is it so important? And I'll also get to the other 2 panelists on this basic question.
Yeah, thank you, Jos, for the question. This is an important question. Why inclusion such as important topic right now, in particularly for the climate? Because currently there is a growing demand to address the threat of the climate change, and also social inequality has also led to emergence of inclusive the climate action. Building on historical movements such as sustainable development and also environmental justice. Inclusive climate action addresses a growing, burden and also unrepresented or excluded a social group. That's Embassy of the Dutch also mentioned, social group, and also who often suffer and the most as a result of climate change. In addition, we also know that existing social inequalities could be made worse by the effect of changing the climate. Inclusion of climate, of course, is important because it's mean both reducing the effect of climate change on the most vulnerable and ensuring the benefit and burdens of climate action are equitable, distributed among the vulnerable group. I think that's my response to your question, Jos.
All right, so basically you're also saying, like our ambassador did, it's the most vulnerable groups that get hit the most, and existing inequalities you're also touching upon that may become worse due to climate change. Maybe Taki, you have something to add to that.
Okay, in my view, inclusion is an important topic in climate discourses on climate discussion, at least based on the three arguments. The first, inclusion enable people to encourage and ensure that action to reduce climate change impacts or climate change consequences are fairly and equitably distributed, with the main focus on the most vulnerable society or group. The second, inclusion provides public space for multiple stakeholders' involvement, including the right holders, into fair and accessible decision-making process or mechanism like the formulating, implementing, monitoring, and evaluating policy, as well as encourage equitably distribute in policy outcome or policy impact. The third, inclusion is a wise of working or an approach which can consider as solution to address inequality socio-economic capacity in dealing with the negative impact of climate change by fairly and equitable. Yeah, that's all, Jos.
Yeah, so aside from the social and economic effects, you also add that angle of access to transparent policy making and ensuring that people that have, for example, land rights are also involved in those discussions. Ibu Laura, last but certainly not least on this question, what are your views on the importance of inclusion for climate discussions?
Yeah, thank you, Jos. I think I share the same opinion with Pak Taki and also Pak Jete on this area. I just want to highlight the importance of data, that it is relatable to all of us, that according to the data itself, it already shows that at least, the climate crisis has disproportionately impacted already those who are economically and socially marginalized, and particularly in Asia. And we know this amounts to 2.4 billion people in the region. And if we look at the situation in Indonesia alone, we know for a fact that in this year, 2021, we had at least 1,800 disasters in the country, and all of them affected those who are vulnerable. So it is very important to really look at how we can develop solutions to address the climate change with a diversity and inclusion mindset, so that it can offer the potential to more effectively solve both business and societal issues. And this is really needed so that we can actually realize or implement the just transition for all people that are at risk, to have a voice, and they influence the policy processes, so that real change can actually be achieved, because the policy will be more relatable and really addressing the problems.
Those are really sad numbers to hear, actually. So 1,800 disasters, and then well, I think we all know by now who get hit the most from those. Also, the fact that it's especially in Asia, this is a problem is new to me, but also very relevant, I think. And I'm sure we'll also get to the business angle a bit later on. Karen, I know you have your questions diving deeper into those different groups. So please go ahead and proceed with your next question.
Thank you, Joost, and also thank you, Ibo Laura, and our other two panelists for making clear why it is so important to have inclusion for climate. I think that is without a doubt. And when we talk about inclusion, we can talk about different groups, and Pataki already mentioned some of them. Pajiti, you also did. Maybe to focus a bit more on those specific groups, and then maybe to start with youth, women and indigenous people. Why is it important that these groups should be involved in the climate debate? Pajiti, would you like to elaborate on that?
Yeah, thank you, Karen. Yeah, I see from the women, youth, and also indigenous community, the involvement of those groups are very crucial and also very important in the climate discussion. There's some reason why those groups are very crucial and also very important. Yeah, we know that those groups are very vulnerable, not only physically but also economic mobility. Yeah, in many places in Indonesia, we can see their representative opportunities, making them more vulnerable to grow environmental tension. Yeah, and to climate situation that present multiple hazards, as Laura already mentioned. For instance, we can see drought, flooding, extreme, and also unpredictable climate pattern present life and death for those groups. Many women in the rural area and also indigenous people, because they are who are also responsible for providing their food, water, energy, etc. for their families. Yeah, so this vulnerable group is the most affected because of limitation of economic access and also capacity to face various disruption and also including climate change. I would like to emphasize more, but we also have to think that those groups not only vulnerable, but in positive way. We can see they are also effective actors or agents, of change in relation to both mitigation and also adaptation. They often have a strong knowledge, indigenous knowledge, expertise, can be used in the climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies. And I would like to say, for furthermore, involvement women, IPs, youth in the climate discussion is important. Yeah, and the last I would like to say, based on the science assessment that conducted by the IPCC and also by Intergovernmental of Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem, we can see that traditional practices in many places in Indonesia is really steward and also regenerate nature in forests, grassland, and also other ecosystem by indigenous people, provide essential asset in the fight against the climate change. While, if we already know, the indigenous people only 6%, I think, living in this planet, but they protect more than 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity. So this is one example, the good example. In Indonesia, we can also see in community in Sungai Utik in West Kalimantan, and also in Maluku with their Sasi as a traditional knowledge, and also in other area, Pataki in Mataram also, they are very well known with the Sasi system. So it's very, very good example how the indigenous people also can as actor agent of the climate change. I think that's all, Karen.
Thank you. I think that those are very impressive numbers. And I also believe that it's good to highlight that these vulnerable people are not only at the front line when it comes to experience the effects of the climate change, but also that because of that, they have a lot of knowledge. And that is why it is important to include them in the debate. So thank you very much also for providing these examples. Joost?
Yeah, I know Pataki has a special interest in one particular group as well, which is people with disabilities. So I'd love to hear from him how he sees the involvement of people with disabilities in the whole climate debate, and well, what their involvement should be in his view. Pataki, please.
Why the people with disability need to be considered and taken into climate discussion or climate policy? Because they are one of population groups who most acutely affected by climate change impacts. Unfortunately, mostly of them remain excluded from decision-making process in addressing and preventing climate change on multiple policy level. So I want to share some key points regarding to person with disability that need to be added in climate debate, the first, the accurately data or map related who and where are they. The second, methods or ways to assess a characteristic of their vulnerabilities and capacity related to climate change impact. The third, how to involve them, and on what aspects should they be involved in particular regarding to climate change discussion. The person with disability should be involved like in mapping of climate change risk, participatory assessment of their characteristic vulnerabilities and capacities in formulation policy, or design of inclusive climate program on climate policy, and then I think is include the implementation of inclusive climate policy, like the climate related training, climate related education, climate campaign, or we must involve them in evaluate or reflect of climate policy implementation. If we implement the climate approach to them, so we have the open space and opportunity to them to engage in climate related discussion and inclusive decision making process. They will recognize, understand, and assess the characteristic of their own risk, vulnerability, and capacity, and they will have improve adaptive capacity through their involvement in climate related education and training. How to involve them? I think we must explore directly their need, their view and aspiration in climate discussion or decision making process using inclusive technique or methods according to their respective characteristic. And then we must presenting directly their representative in climate discussion. In our consortium, we have the best practices to involve the person with disabilities, like in our member consortium in district of Kupang as Nusa Tenggara, like the Bengkel APEC was implemented evidence-based advocacy through survey, formulation of policy paper, established inclusive forum, and dialogue in order to encourage regional policy to encourage regional policy change responsive with the person with this disability need. The last, how to what kind the approach can successful if we want to involve the person with disability. The first, we must design affirmative policy or action regarding to climate change for them. And the second, involve representative of person with disability in district and provincial development planning forum. And the last is how to strengthening CSO rules in voicing out the vulnerability group needs and aspiration to the policymaker. Also, CSO rule in bridging relation between government as data bearer and person with the disability as the right holder. That's all, Josh.
Sorry, Joost, you are still muted.
That's unfortunate. Now it should be better. Thanks, Karen. Yeah, so Pataki, very insightful and also good to that you gave us a bit of a let's say example in practice how that works with involving people with disabilities, also on a let's say a district and a regional level. And I know we'll get to talk about the different levels of governance as well later on in this discussion, which is very important. Karen, maybe for the next question.
Yes, so we have been discussing now the position of women, of youth, of indigenous communities, as well as people with disabilities. We would now like to address the position of smallholders. And I know Ibu Laura has a lot of experience with that. Would you like to elaborate what this specific group could add to the debate and how smallholders should be involved in the discussion?
Yeah, thank you, Karen. So I would like to share actually a recent study that is done by Oxfam Partners, Traction Energy Asia, that actually highlights that greenhouse gas emissions caused by converting forests to plantations and palm oil mills alone contributed at least 83 to 95% to the national greenhouse gas emissions. What is interesting is actually to look at the data in Indonesia that according to the Central Bureau of Statistics in 2019, it states that a third of our palm oil comes from smallholder plantations. And the people's plantations themselves consist of plasma smallholders and independent smallholders. What is important to be understood here is the fact that they tend to be in the lower economic class and they are usually the beneficiary families of the social security. Yeah, so if we are looking at it at an environmental point of view, the involvement of independent oil palm smallholders in the national biodiesel supply chain or the policy can support the government of Indonesia to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, according to the research, at least by 29% in 2030, by 2030. Yeah? So this is actually a very interesting fact that we need to work on as an opportunity. But at the same time, when we look at this, we know that the complexity is there because the productivity of the independent palm oil smallholders is only around half of the productivity of oil palm companies. Why is it like that? It's because of the problems of the rights on the land holder. Yeah. So if we are looking at this, it is important to really reflect and look at the policy on how serious the commitment from the private sector, in this case palm oil companies or the government, to really look at how we can enable inclusive business model that is actually sustainable and at the same time it is fair and provide justice, not only environmentally but also socially and economically. So we at Oxfam really would like to trigger that the private sector engagement is really in the principles that we respect the human rights. We have the commitment that we all look at the environmental protection. And at the same time, we request the government to really have the enabling policy so that the policy itself will hold people in power to be more accountable. And in this area, working together, particularly with the women smallholders, are as key groups that can contribute for the commitment to reduce emissions. And if we look at the work that we are doing in Indonesia, formerly it was done in Kalimantan and Sumatra, and currently we have a program in Sulawesi. We try to empower the women smallholders groups to present their voices so that they can engage with the private sector better, to influence the policy at the local level, working directly and closely with the government of the area in the region, and then they fight for the land rights. And in this area, we really want to see that the business model is inclusive and the business model is finally sustainable.
Thank you very much. And also thank you very much for showing these examples, because I think, and that goes for all three of you, that by elaborating on these different groups, you also give the numbers that are usually being discussed a real face. So now we have a better idea of what we are talking about. And after sharing these insights, we would like to continue to discuss about the governance. So for that, I would like to give the word to Joost.
Yes, Pataki already said a few words before on the different levels of government being involved in the climate discussions. Maybe Pataki, you can say a bit more on how those levels, the international, the national, the subnational, so the regional level, district level, how those all should be connected, and to what extent there are things there that need to be improved to come to good solutions, or of course best practices of things that are going really well. Please.
Okay, Josh. I think if the related to question how can connection between inclusiveness at different governance level be made, I think we must provide like a channel that allow multiple level of policy making to be well connected through establish of multi-stakeholder partnership forum for inclusive issues in states from international to local levels. The existence of a connected multi-stakeholder partnership forum enable the flow of information be maintained from local to national and from national to international level, or vice versa. I think it is the strategy for us to bring up local initiative, local practices as evident for the national policy or international issue. I think what can be improved. I think I'm focused in four things. Is the first, how to we're talking about availability of accurately the database related to who and where are they, like the person with the disability and the most vulnerable, the other most vulnerable group, and then how to mainstream inclusive oriented policy in development agendas through how to set up, how to establish networking, and the last, and how to strategy for capacity of stakeholder on inclusion issue. That's all, Josh.
Thank you, Pataki. So I see that you emphasize, let's say, the multi-stakeholder forum approach, that could be a good way to connect all these levels, and also that's very important to do this data-based. So really have the right information to have a proper and targeted discussion. Karen, back to you for the next question in this series on governance.
Yeah, maybe to add on that, Ibu Laura, may I ask you, what kind of role do you see for CSOs and NGOs to connect these different layers of government, or maybe in providing data, sharing thoughts? What do you think?
Yeah, so we basically, as civil society organizations, need to use the civic space to really give pressure. So government and companies have promised to tackle the climate crisis and protect the people at its hardest. So we help to make sure that we hold the people who are in power, yeah, to account. Of course, one of the area is actually to use multi-dialogue discussion, providing evidence and data, giving them the best practices, but also not only success story, but failures, learn from failures. And these all are used so that we can make sure that the aspirations are heard by the policymakers and move the public. So we also need to mobilize public to influence the political dynamic. And at the time being, I know for sure that Indonesia is to be the presidency of G20 in 2022. So this is the momentum for CSO to come together in Indonesia and work with other CSOs in other countries to really shape the global economic policy so that it addresses the climate problems. And as Oxfam is also, very active in the global north, particularly because as COP26 is hosted in the UK, the campaign to really call for an action for the policymakers to really look at the environmental problems, really to ask them to look at it as well from the gender lens and the social lens. And I think that is in the area where we can connect with the government. But at the same time, the justification and the validity of the voice is there because CSO really connect with the communities. Yeah, so we help and contribute in the area where community needs to adapt with the climate change, building the resilience, finding innovations, working together closely, experimenting things. Yeah, and at the same time using those realities so that we can rebalance the picture of the policy when it is, look against the data or the reality on the ground. And this is part of the monitoring mechanism, I guess, because we really need to know when we connect with the community, the farmer association, the women's group, yeah, the smallholder groups, youth, people with disability, indigenous people, all of them, the voice are actually taken to be heard to influence the policy at the national, regional, and global level as well. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you so much. There's enough work to do. that is clear. And I think when you work together also to give that pressure, I can totally agree that then that makes the voice stronger. So I think that's a very good aim. Over to Joost.
Yeah, that brings me straight to my question for JT, which zooms in a little bit more on Indonesia itself. We already know, of course, that Indonesia will take the G20 presidency, I think starting in December already. And after that, the ASEAN presidency as well in 2023. So this puts Indonesia right center stage also at the global level and including on climate-related issues. So how do you see the role of CSOs also in interacting with Indonesia to make sure that those voices are heard also within their presidencies? JT, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, thank you, Jos. So at least from my perspective, there is the role of CSO in Indonesia regarding to the G20 and also for the ASEAN level and also global level. The first one is CSO might be as a bridge, between the government institution, private institution, and also the community, leading to a more direct dialogue at the global to local and also local to global. This is the number one is important role of CSO. And the second role is giving voice to the most vulnerable group, women, indigenous people, youth, and also disabled, etc. And also CSO must ensure acknowledgement of the high vulnerability group in public policy through advocacy process. This is the second role of CSO that are important. And the third role of CSO could be promoting accountability through example, not just talking, but also give an example for the government, for private sector and other stakeholders as a strategy for ensuring quality and transparency for diverse actor of participation. And the last but not least, actively participating in interinstitutional coordination at the local, national, regional, and global level. I would like to give at least two examples at the ASEAN level where NTFE are quite successful involving in the global discussion when we also collaborate with the ASEAN Secretariat in Jakarta, how NTFE with all partners creating ASEAN Working Group on Social Forestry is a good platform, a good vehicle to dialogue between the government in ASEAN and also with the private sector as well as the local communities and also women and other vulnerable group. And the second one is just finished today is we also created a community-based non-timber forest enterprise at ASEAN level. So it's also attending a lot of government offices participated and also private sector, university and also local communities and local producer in ASEAN level. I think those four role CSO is very important and also looking forward to future to collaborate in the global and also local to global and also global to local. Back to you, Jos.
Right, so very good catchphrases as well. So what you're saying is that it's crucial that CSOs make that connection between the different levels, but also between the different players and making their voices heard We touched upon G20, but especially also in the ASEAN format. I think Ibu Laura already mentioned before that in Asia there are many vulnerable groups that suffer from climate change. So ASEAN would indeed be a very important forum for that as well. Another thing coming up is the COP26. Karen, I know you have your question on that as well to wrap up our little panel today.
Yes, that's correct. But before we move on to that, may I ask 1 second, or actually 3, so that we can take a group picture? So I will count from 3 to 1, and then the picture will be taken. So 3, 2, 1. All right, that's done.
Very important.
Yeah, well, I think listening to all 3 of you, the theme of this EU Climate Diplomacy Week is ambition. And I think for the CSOs, the ambitions are definitely there. And yeah, we already talked about the COP26 that's coming up, but also after that, the G20, the leadership within ASEAN. So to end this session, could you share with us your recommendation to the leaders who will attend this fora on how to improve the inclusion for climate? Maybe Ibu Laura, to start with you.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. I think it's important to really re-emphasize and remind all the policymakers that climate change is really indeed the biggest threat to the humankind. This is really push people deeper into poverty. So it is important to address the climate crisis using different approaches, because business as usual is not progressive enough. And we want to ensure that we amplify women's voices, all the vulnerable groups, the farmers, on how they are being affected by the climate crisis. And we believe the problems that we face is multidimensional. So looking at environmental, political, economic, cultural, and social all together, particularly because we are at the phase of the pandemic as well. And it is important that solutions are actually there to really increase the quality of the people and the resilience at the face of the crisis. So this will not be shaped without the aspiration, the involvement, the participation of those who are at risk. And secondly, I think we want the government to be committed to ensure that policy is actually to enable all the stakeholders to work in accountable manners with respect of human rights. So when we talk about economic policy, it doesn't stand alone as it is for economic growth, but it is there actually to address multidimensionally problems. And that includes how we can provide solutions, innovations, to really address the climate crisis that we are now having. Thank you, Karen.
Clear. So it's not only about taking everyone on board, but also taking all the different aspects on board. Looking at it from a multidimensional way. Yeah. Pataki, what would be your recommendation?
Okay, I have 2 recommendations. The first, the leader at COP26 not only consider, but must be realized inclusion approach with focus on the most vulnerable groups in climate discussion, policy, and negotiation by right-based approach. We consent with the right-based approach. The secondly, encourage policy change on inclusion for climate with affirmative-oriented for vulnerable group in decision-making process and climate empowerment, like the how to empower the vulnerable group in the training, education, adaptation, and the other action regarding to climate change policy. It is shortly my recommendation, Karen.
Clear. So involvement of these vulnerable groups on all levels, as well as a rights-based approach. Pak GT, what would be your recommendation?
Yeah, thank you, Karen. So from CSO perspective, at least there is 6 recommendations. The first recommendation is keep up the big ambition. This is very important. Keep up the big ambition for the leader who will come to COP26 in UK. And the second recommendation from CSO is engaging a wide range of stakeholders. This is important, not only in designing the policies, but also the equitable policy impact. And the third recommendation from CSO is consistently identify the holistic solution with multiple benefit integrated, as Ibu Laura already mentioned, social equity, economic opportunity, and also climate consideration. And the fourth, never stop for searching for opportunities to implement climate action that directly benefit low income, underrepresented, and also vulnerable communities. And measure the impact. So if needed, adjust if needed. And the last recommendation from us is forming a partnership amongst governments, business, NGOs, and also vulnerable group. I think those recommendations come from our discussion internally with the Alliance. Back to you, Karen.
Thank you for sharing those recommendations with us. Very clear. Now it's up to Joost to wrap up this session.
And I will. We're already even a bit over time, so I have to be quick about it. But very, very happy that we leave the session with a bag full of very concrete recommendations, also for the leaders at COP26. And I really hope they are being heard also by our audiences back in the EU and here in Indonesia. With that, I would like to thank our panelists so much, Ibu Laura, Pak Taki, Pak Jeti, for having this discussion with us and giving our audience a quick taste of what is important in inclusion for climate and how to approach that. There's of course lots to say about that, but this really gives everything in a nutshell. So thanks a lot for that, and thank you to our audience for being here today and engaging with us by viewing this panel. So thank you so much, everybody, and I would love to see you all in real life very soon. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks.
Thank you.